Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy. It's Wednesday, the 6th of November, and I'm joined this evening by Richard Thomson, the previous SNP MP for Gordon. Good evening, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Pleasure to be back.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Without further ado, I'll just start with the today is the 987th day of the Ukraine war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has congratulated Donald Trump on his impressive election victory, adding, "I appreciate President Trump's commitment to the peace through strength approach in global affairs." He recalled their great meeting in New York in September and said the two had discussed ways to put an end to Russian aggression in Ukraine. He praised Trump's decisive leadership and cited the strong bipartisan support for Ukraine in the US. North Korean troops in Russia have come under Ukrainian fire, a Kyiv official said on Tuesday. The first North Korean troops have already been shelled in the Kursk region, said Andriy Kovalenko, a member of Ukraine's Security Council. The Ukrainian Defence Minister, Rustem Umerov, also said in an interview with South Korean television that he understood the small engagement had occurred with the North Koreans. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, said the first battles between the Ukrainian military and North Korean troops open a new page in instability in the world. A Russian missile attack on Ukraine's southeastern city of Zaporizhia on Tuesday killed 6 people, injured 23, and destroyed a critical infrastructure facility, Ukrainian officials said. Ivan Fedorov, the regional governor, said in a statement that a fire broke out as a result of the strike. Foreign ministers from the G7 democracies and 3 key allies said on Tuesday they were gravely concerned by the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia and the possibility they may be used in the war against Ukraine. The DPRK's, that's North Korea's direct support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, besides showing Russia's desperate efforts to compensate its losses, would mark a dangerous expansion of the conflict, the minister said. Besides G7 members, the US, Japan, Italy, Britain, Germany, France and Canada, the statement was also signed by South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. The ministers said they condemned in the strongest possible terms increased military cooperation between North Korea and Russia, including Russia's unlawful procurement of North Korean ballistic missiles. They said they were deeply concerned about the potential for transfer of nuclear or ballistic missile-related technology to North Korea and would work with international partners for a coordinated response to this new development. An engineer at a factory that makes tanks for Russia's war in Ukraine was jailed for 16 years on Tuesday after being convicted of committing state treason by passing military secrets to Kyiv. Weeks ago, his wife received a similar sentence. The court in Sverdlovsk region said Daniel Mukhametov, 32, who worked at who worked at the Uralvagonzavod tank factory, had partially admitted his guilt after being accused of passing unspecified technical military information to Ukraine's intelligence services. Meanwhile, a Russian court in the western Smolensk region jailed a man for 12 years for sabotage of the railways. My apologies for the poor pronunciations there. Richard, I'm just going to ask you specifically, President Zelensky's congratulations of President Trump. Did you, like me, detect a slightly nervous hint to the tone of that?
Yes, I did, Brian. I think it's Trump's re-election is something that will be of great concern to the Ukrainians. Now, we all know that Trump's a braggart in saying that he would bring the war to an end in one day. Well, I dare say that is possible, but not necessarily in a way that would be of benefit to the Ukrainians or that would honour the tenacious battles that they've fought and the sacrifices that they've made to hold on to the territory that they have of their own country. So, yeah, I think there's a great deal of uncertainty. I think it's a result that Vladimir Putin will certainly be welcoming. And, there's been, quite apart from the boasting, Trump also said, I think at one of his rallies, although he said a hell of a lot of things at his rallies, one way and another, very little of it coherent, was that he regarded President Zelensky as the best salesman in the world, because every time he came to the US, he left with $60 billion of equipment, or at least the promise of it. So, without question, it's US military support that has kept the Ukrainians on the battlefield, that has helped them to fight the Russians to not quite a standstill anymore, but to a bit of a crawl. So without that US military support, it's hard to see how the gap could be filled. And so I think there'll be a lot of people in Ukraine are hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst as a result of the outcome of the US election.
Thank you, Richard. And now our daily update on the situation in the Middle East. At least 43,391 Palestinians have been killed and 102,347 injured in Gaza since October the 7th, 2023, according to a statement from the Gaza Health Ministry. Widespread protests have broken out across Israel after the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, fired his Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant. Netanyahu said there had been too many gaps between them over the management of Israel's wars and that a crisis of trust had developed. He named Israel Katz as the new Defence Minister. Thousands of Israelis spontaneously rallied in Tel Aviv against the decision, to block a main road across Israel, while others demonstrated outside Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, chanting slogans like "We deserve better leaders" and calling the Prime Minister a traitor. Some clashed with police. Gallant said after his dismissal that he believed everyone of conscription age must serve in the IDF and defend the State of Israel, including the ultra-Orthodox, and that it was Israel's moral obligation and responsibility to bring Israeli hostages home with as many alive as possible. There would not be any atonement for abandoning the captives and for those leading this mistaken path, he said. Gallant also spoke for the need of a state inquiry into the security failures that enabled the October 7th attacks. Israel's President, Isaac Herzog, called Gallant's dismissal the last thing Israel needs. Opposition leader Yair Lapid said the move was an act of madness in the middle of a war and that Netanyahu is selling Israel's security and the Israeli army soldiers for a disgraceful political survival. The far-right National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, praised Netanyahu for firing the defence minister, saying that with Gallant, absolute victory cannot be achieved. Israel Katz vowed to prioritise the return of Israel's hostages and the destruction of Hamas and Hezbollah in his first post on X since accepting the defence minister's role. An Israeli strike targeting a residential building in the town of Barya, about 20 kilometres south of Beirut, killed at least 20 people on Tuesday, Lebanon's health minister said. Rescue operations were underway, it said. Flames reportedly continued to emerge from the building on Tuesday evening. An Iran-backed militia in Iraq reportedly claimed to have fired drones at Israel. The Islamic resistance in Iraq said it fired them at an unspecified site in what it appeared to indicate was Israel's south and attacked a vital target in the port city of Haifa. Richard, I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you about Trump again. I've heard more than one person in the news today refer to Donald Trump's habit of cozying up to dictators, and lots of people in the news have made comment about how friendly he is with both Putin and Netanyahu. So again, is this another reason for people to be worried about Trump's election today?
Absolutely. And I think the only thing that is predictable in many ways about Trump, other than his deplorable, at times, personal conduct, is, or at least the only thing that's predictable about him in a political sense, is his unpredictability. I think that the US government, clearly for very many people, did not go far enough in terms of its condemnation of the actions of the Israeli government over the last year in Gaza and now in Lebanon. Clearly, they didn't do anything to restrain the Israeli government or give the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu any reason to fear the consequences of the actions of the Israeli government in pursuing the offensive military actions that they had. So I think in Tel Aviv tonight there will be certainly amongst the Israeli government they will be thinking that they have got someone who is more of an ally in terms of their current objectives than they had in Joe Biden, which is ironic given the long association that Joe Biden had in terms of supporting the state of Israel across many years. So they will think that they've had an upgrade in the White House in terms of what the support that they might get diplomatically, politically, financially, and militarily. If I could maybe just go back to the sacking by Netanyahu of Yoav Gallant, the former defence minister. He's an interesting character. He actually served in the Israeli armed forces. I believe he rose to the rank of Major General. He's been in charge of military operations at a very high level before. So he was someone who, there's a big interplay in Israel between politics and the political sphere and people who have served in the Israeli Defence Forces. And I think somebody like Mr. Gallant understands exactly what military action can achieve, but he also understands the limitations of it. And you saw that because when he also posed the essential question about any piece of military action, which is the question of what comes next. And he had irritated Netanyahu not only, I think, because of his closeness to and the respect that he had in the armed forces of somebody who clearly knew what he was doing and knew what he was talking about in a military sense, but also the fact that he was posing the question of what comes next. What is the end objective? What does victory look like? How are Israel's security aims being met by what is being done in the name of the state of Israel in Gaza and now in Lebanon? And I think that clearly gets up. That's clearly irritated Benjamin Netanyahu quite considerably, because I think he needs an ongoing perpetual conflict in order to shore up his own political position, and he doesn't like people who know more about what's going on than he does, who are smarter than him and who are looking further ahead than him around him. So I think that it's a sign of how out of control Mr. Netanyahu is that he has gotten rid of somebody who, whatever we think about the military action that the Israeli state is undertaking at present, was asking the question of, look, why are we doing this? What comes next? And I think that, allied to the election of Donald Trump, will see an emboldened Netanyahu, and I think it moves the prospect for peace in Israel and the Middle East further away.
Thank you, Richard. That's interesting. It's clear that you're much more informed about what's going on in Israel and Gaza than I am, so thank you for that. You mentioned, well, we've mentioned Trump already, so the next item is Donald Trump has been elected the 47th President of the United States in a stunning political resurrection that sent shockwaves through America and around the world. Trump has become the first convicted criminal to win the White House. At 78, he is also the oldest person ever elected to the office. The result will also sound alarm bells in foreign capitals, given Trump's chaotic leadership style and overtures to authoritarians such as Vladimir Putin of Russia and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He was branded a threat to democracy and even a fascist by his opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, and one of his own former White House officials, yet the American electorate proved willing to push such concerns aside and hand the nuclear codes to the property developer turned reality TV star for a second time. Trump defeated Harris, who had been seeking to make history herself as the first black woman and as the first South Asian American to become president in the US's 248-year history. As votes were counted overnight, Trump took North Carolina early on, the first battleground state to be called, and later he won Georgia and Pennsylvania. as early as 1:22 a.m. EET time, Eastern Seaboard time, at Trump's election watch party in Palm Beach, Florida, a prolonged almighty roar went up when Fox News called Pennsylvania for the Republican nominee. After 2 a.m., Trump emerged to speak, surrounded by his family, close aides, and J.D. Vance, the hard-right Ohio senator he made his vice presidential pick. By 5:37 a.m. Eastern Seaboard time, the Associated Press called Wisconsin for Trump, with the state's 10 electoral college votes tipping Trump's total to 277, well past the 270 votes needed to win the presidency. In Congress, Republicans also recaptured the US Senate, and they are also expected to retain control of the House of Representatives, raising concerns for the system of checks and balances in the American government system. Kamala Harris made reproductive rights and personal freedoms a rallying cry and backed a national law codifying access to safe abortion. Her loss represents a devastating, anxiety-inducing blow to supporters reminiscent of Hillary Clinton's crushing defeat in 2016. She is expected to make a statement conceding defeat about 9 p.m. GMT this evening. Ukraine has been plunged into gloom and uncertainty after Donald Trump's victory, amid expectations that he is likely to end US military assistance, while the Kremlin said its aim of subjugating its neighbour remained unchanged. Trump boasted he could end the decade-long Russo-Ukrainian war in 24 hours. Richard, I can't help thinking that, so now the 45th and the 47th President of the United States is a convicted felon. He's a sexual predator. As we said, he closes up to dictators. He's now been re-elected. He's going to feel vindicated and he's going to be completely unbearable. And do you remember back in the day when we first heard he was first running for president? We all laughed at him and thought it was a joke and never took him seriously. And here we are now. So I'll just ask you, just in general, what do you think of the situation that we're in? The sound seems to have gone again, Richard. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Can you? I'll carry on. I'll assume you can hear me now. I think first and foremost, you have to respect the outcome of the election. It's clear, it's decisive, and whatever you think of the individual concerned, he's won, and you respect the office, even if you don't necessarily respect the occupant. I can remember back then when it was considered a bit of a joke that Donald Trump might ever run for office. I actually, met him on one occasion when he was opening his golf course in Aberdeenshire. A large part of that was in the ward I used to represent on Aberdeenshire Council, and the lion's share of it, in fact, all of it, is in the Westminster seat I used to represent. So I certainly had nothing to do with him or his organisation in recent years, but you couldn't help but have to do with the organisation in the council days when planning applications were going in. But he has clearly reshaped the Republican Party. They are cowed. They are in awe of him, even after this chaotic and disreputable manner in which he left office after his term as the 45th president. He retained that stranglehold over the Republican Party. Nobody was brave enough really to stand up to him. Those that tried weren't strong enough, and they were afraid of what had become their base. And the MAGA movement, and it is that has kept the nomination for him, even though the MAGA movement is not of massive significance numerically. What it did was it secured them the nomination, and then by having a message that seemed to resonate with more workaday concerns about fears about the American place in the world, fears about the economy, he's managed to persuade people that he has solutions, even though they're very simplistic solutions to very complex problems. And he's managed, you cannot take this away from him. One way or another, he has managed to persuade the greater number of people in America who bothered to get out and cast a vote that he had a better set of solutions for the problems that the US is facing than did his rival, who looks sounds far more like the kind of European political leader that we're used to. But then, back in the day, so did John Kerry when compared with George W. Bush. So, there's clearly, very, very different dynamics at play there. And I think when people were looking at their pocketbook issues, they posed the killer question, who do you feel better off now than you did 4 years ago? And we know that there was some very, very difficult global circumstances for whoever the occupant of the White House had been to navigate there. But people had lost confidence in Joe Biden. And arguably, perhaps there was a route for Kamala Harris to win the election for the position of the vice presidency. But I heard a great description earlier this evening in the news that there just wasn't enough runway for her campaign. And, she appeared to electrify the Democratic base to begin with. She appeared to have, she certainly closed the gap. But for weeks now, the polls have been deadlocked. And I think in the final analysis, when people kind of tuned out the more extreme and shrill rhetoric, it came down to sort of fairly workaday concerns about people losing economic opportunities, being persuaded that was because of immigration, because the current occupant of the Oval Office was too soft, if you put it that way, on when it came to trade with other countries. And now you have Trump looking to reinstall himself in the White House, threatening tariffs, saying that he can bring all sorts of change to the world in relatively short order without actually specifying any detail. And I think he's succeeded in telling enough people what it is that they want to hear. And the Democrats, who should have had everything going for them in this election, were not able to persuade enough people that actually not just the leadership they were offering, but the political changes that they were offering were a better offer than what the Republicans had. So, I think we're buckle up. We're in for a very bumpy ride. I don't think anyone can say that we could be surprised by that, because we've seen this movie before in many respects in terms of how Trump behaves. As I said earlier at the top of the programme, the only thing that's predictable about him politically is his unpredictability. So I think we're in for a very, very bumpy ride here. And but you certainly can't take away from the camp the way that the Republicans strategized about this, and how they effectively disarmed the what should have been you would have thought, certainly viewed from this side of the Atlantic, a set of winning hands and winning issues that the Democrats could potentially have played here.
Richard, I made the very same reference to that Bette Davis quote in my notes, and I was going to ask you about that. You used the word boastful to describe Trump. I couldn't help thinking about Kamala Harris and how she must be, when she was listening to Trump make his victory speech before he had received, got the 720, 270 whatever, forgive me, I forget the number of votes that he needed from the Electoral College to actually be declared the winner, that she must just be sitting at home thinking the barefaced cheek of him. And he boasted about oil, about how America has much more oil than any other country in the world, which implied that he's going to try and get it up out of the ground as fast as it will pour, and it's going to be used. So this presidency now also then has a huge implication for climate control and climate crisis, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, probably the only bit of slack I'll cut Trump is that in the US system, we're used to TV networks doing their statistical analysis and calling states before all the votes have been counted if it looks likely that a particular candidate's going to win. So he didn't do anything that was out of the ordinary. He's done many things that are utterly extraordinary and not in a good way in his time in public life, but he didn't do anything amiss there. So I think that while it's understandable that Kamala Harris will want to, wait as long as she can just to make absolutely sure and to make sure she's ready and get her messaging right and start preparing her party for, the next 4 years. I don't think, he's only done what other previous candidates, Democrat and Republican, have done. But to get to the more important issue about oil extraction, yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, America is of huge import, not just as an energy producer, not just as the leading industrial economy in the world, but in terms of the political example it sets. And if America is seen to be moving away from trying to tackle the climate crisis, from doing what it can do, and reducing the power of its example in that respect, then it's going to give license to lots of other countries to do exactly the same. Now, of course, we know the huge economic opportunities that there are in renewables. We particularly know that in Scotland. We also know that our own energy security, it can be underpinned by hydrocarbons, but it won't be guaranteed forever by hydrocarbons, which is why we need to move away from hydrocarbons as a source of energy. And if Trump is going to throw environmental caution to the wind, not just in terms of the means of extraction, but also in terms of the consequence of burning it, then it's going to have potentially enormous consequences for the rate of progress that we can make in terms of achieving net zero around the world in the next few years. And I think it's just another reason to be very, very worried about what the next 4 years, not just what happens in the next 4 years will be like, but also the dynamics that it sets in train internally within the US, and also internationally for other countries to deal with. The reverberations of this go far beyond what happens in the next 4 calendar years.
Thank you, Richard. We're out of time on this, but I'm going to be cheeky and stay with it because I've got one more question that I think I need to ask you. And I'm going to try and make up the time later on. So you were talking about the bumpy ride, and that's especially going to be true because both the POTUS, the President of the United States, the Senate and the House of Representatives are all Republican now. It said that in the piece. But on top of that, I've been so today I've spent a lot of time trying to think of a silver lining, and the only one I can come up with is that we've avoided the violence that would have surely followed if Kamala Harris had won, when Trump would then throw a huge temper tantrum. The Capitol had been boarded up before the election started, and state troopers were on the street should there be any trouble. So do you think that the only silver lining that we've got?
Well, I don't think you should ever be rewarding good behaviour, but I think there's a silver lining in the sense that the result, however much you might have wished it to be different, is decisive. There's no room for arguing. There's no room for lawsuits. It's pretty clear who's won, and there will be a smooth transition of power of the kind that Trump absolutely deplorably inhibited and worked against and stirred up against, in his own departure from the White House just over 4 years ago. I suppose a different silver lining might be the US system is built on checks and balances, but clearly there's no prohibition on holding the upper house, the lower house, and the presidency in the hands of the same party. But one thing, he cannot claim that he's being held back by anyone or anything. So, for good or for ill, whatever his policy platform there is no political impediment to that being enacted, so he can't sow further division by claiming he's being obstructed by anyone. In that sense, he's been given enough rope, and it's up to him what he does with it. But I think in terms of the ramifications for what goes on beyond 4 years, I think the one that I would certainly be very concerned about is what that does to the outlook of the Supreme Court. Obviously, an enormously powerful institution within the United States of America, and a key place in its constitution, in that system of checks and balances. And the Republicans have already, in the last decade or more, overturned the understanding that there had to be a bit of bipartisanship in terms of political balance there. And I just think it looks like one of the real casualties of his untrammeled power is that he'll be able to nominate whoever he likes and get them through with the minimum of scrutiny, and completely unbalance the court politically for a generation or more.
So he'll have nobody to blame but himself, and apparently he won't get the keys to the White House until January, which is going to be after his investiture in January. But so we'd best move on and try and make up some time. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research has warned that UK growth is likely to be halved by Donald Trump's victory in the US presidential race if he goes on to impose swingeing new tariffs he has threatened. The NIESR said the protectionist measures planned by the Republican challenger for the White House would result in weaker activity, rising inflation, and higher interest rates from the Bank of England. Amit Kaya, an NIESR economist, said that were Trump to go ahead with a 60% tariff on Chinese goods and a 10% tariff on goods from all other countries, the resulting trade war would lower UK growth by 0.7% points and 0.5 percentage points in the first 2 years. NIESR has estimated that over 2 years, the UK inflation rate would be 3 to 4 points higher, whilst interest rates would be 2 to 3 points higher. In the absence of the Trump tariffs, NIESR forecast in a report published overnight before the election results came in that the UK would grow by 1.2% in 2025 and by 1.4% in 2026, inflation settling at close to the government's 2% target, and official interest rates falling from their current level of 5% to 3.25%. Kaya said the impact of the Trump measures would be more severe if the affected countries imposed tit-for-tat tariffs of their own. US growth would be reduced by about 1.3% to 1.8% in the first 2 years of the tariffs coming into force, depending on whether they prompted retaliation. The think tank expressed scepticism about the expected impact of last week's budget on the long-term growth potential of the economy, which it puts at 1.2% a year. NIESR's quarterly update of the state of the economy also said Rachel Reeves' decision to keep the freeze on income tax allowances and thresholds in place until April 2028 would cost the poorest 15% of households £600 a year in extra tax. The UK's poorest families had been the hardest hit by the failure of wages to keep pace with rising prices during the cost of living crisis, resulting in a fall in living standards of about 20%, or £2,500 from 2021 to 2024 to 2024-2025. Richard, I'm going to go back to Trump's speech here because another thing that he brought up in his victory speech was Elon Musk. This will be relevant to tariffs, I promise. All the talking heads that I've seen on the media today when talking about Donald Trump's rather random and rambling eulogy about Elon Musk said that, this is all about Twitter or Skynet. But I don't know, do you not agree with me? I think it was maybe more to do with Tesla and the risk of China impacting on Elon Musk's Tesla electric cars. And is that maybe where the trade tariffs are maybe going to be more useful for Trump?
Well, I think he would want to be careful about that. Look, sometimes tariffs serve a very useful purpose. If you want to keep out inferior products, like particularly, on food, for example, if there's a food product that's produced much more cheaply and to a much lower standard in another jurisdiction, if there's a risk of that coming in and flooding your market and putting your domestic producers out of business, then you're not able to do welfare inspections, for example, on a country on the other side of the world, or even not too far away from you. So sometimes tariffs are quite good because that means that price acts as the inhibitor to that particular good coming into your economy, and you're able to protect your own domestic producers and also your standards. So tariffs have a place, but generally speaking, they will make everybody poorer. Sometimes there's a good reason why you wouldn't care about that. I've just given one, I hope. But generally speaking, they just make trade more difficult. They make everything more expensive. They push inflation up. And if you're a president that's been boasting about how you're going to bring inflation down, you maybe don't care much about your linking your actual deliverables and outputs to what you promised in the campaign now that you're in the Oval Office. But tariffs are not going to make America more prosperous. And Elon Musk would be right, I think, to be worried about tariffs. So there's an interesting clip I saw of him earlier. He was on an American podcaster's show, and he made the point that now I would never be seen dead in a Tesla, even if I could afford one. I've no idea where the components are in it are manufactured. But I thought Elon Musk made a very interesting point in that. He said that a lot of American industrialists wouldn't necessarily be opposed to, trying to re-establish more of a manufacturing base in the USA, but you can't do it overnight. And if you start slapping tariffs on important goods, services and components coming in, then all you're doing is pushing up the price of the products that you are manufacturing. If you're not manufacturing, if there's things that are coming in as finished goods that you're slapping tariffs on, it means that that's more expensive. It's not the country that the tariffs are being applied to, it's exports from that ends up paying them. It's domestic consumers who end up paying for it. And of course, when they're paying on that tariff, that means that they've got less money to spend on other things. They've got less money to invest. And there's a whole vicious circle that begins to affect your own economy. And it's one of those things that, generally speaking, makes everybody poorer. So, yeah, I think, folk like Elon Musk would be right to be very worried about Trump slapping tariffs on electric vehicles or anything else, because, of course, one of the things that can happen is that you get tit for tat reactions to that. So if Trump decides to turn his tariff fire on the European Union, for example, the European Union have let it be known that they're sitting there ready to go with retaliatory measures. They've anticipated where they think US tariffs might land, and they've given some thought to how they could hurt the US economy in return, in a way that would still be proportionate to any tariffs that are being slapped on goods from the EU. Scotland has got particular cause to worry. Although we were dragged out of the EU against our will, that didn't save us when the US was slapping tariffs on whisky. Now, here's a classic example of how that hurts everybody, because there's so much cross-ownership in the Scotch Whisky Association. So much of it is owned internationally by companies that also have significant stakes in the US bourbon and whisky industry. So if the US slaps tariffs on whisky and the EU retaliates with tariffs on bourbon, then the parent companies have less money to invest in Scottish distilleries, and in that sense, whisky and bourbon are entirely complementary products. But what that will do is it means that there's less money there to invest, there's less money available to grow the market, the product becomes more expensive, consumers substitute it for other alcoholic drinks, and again, everybody loses. So I think there's a certain amount of machismo about Trump's threats to introduce tariffs. It's something that plays well, but I think it only plays well if you don't understand the outcomes. And as I say, if the world gets into a global war on tariffs instigated by Donald Trump, then everybody will get poorer, including the US economy as well.
Thank you, Richard. And I guess another potential probable complication is that it's going to make any chance of a post-Brexit trade deal between the UK and America even more unlikely than it was when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. But time's against us. And you mentioned whisky, which leads us perfectly into the next item. The SNP has challenged Scottish Labour MPs to vote against Scotch whisky tax hikes in this evening's tax resolution vote. With Donald Trump winning the US presidential election, the effect of the rise in alcohol duties on whisky could be further exacerbated if Trump imposes tariffs on Scotch whisky. Labour announced an increase in whisky tax at the budget in what the Scottish Whisky Association said was a hammer blow to Scotland's national drink and broke Labour's previous promises to the industry. The challenge arrives amid trade fears after a 25% tariff on single malt Scotch whisky was levied for 18 months in Donald Trump's first term, with the Scotch whisky industry losing over £600 million in exports to the US. The budget raid on Scottish whisky came despite Sir Keir Starmer promising before the general election that he would back Scottish producers to the hilt, following a visit to the Inchdairney whisky distillery. In 2022 alone, Scotch whisky generated £7.1 billion for the UK economy, supporting more than 40,000 jobs in Scotland. Commenting ahead of the vote, the SNP MP for Moray West, Nairn and Strathspey and Vice Chair of the APPG on Scotch whisky, Graham Leadbitter, said, After Trump's victory, Scottish Labour MPs are faced with a simple choice this evening. They can either break the whip and vote against Labour's raid on Scottish whisky, or they can break the promise to the Scottish communities this industry supports in the face of steep tariffs coming down the track. He went on to say SNP MPs will vote against this raid on Scotland's national drink, and Scottish voters will be watching to see if Scottish Labour MPs are prepared to break Keir Starmer's whip instead of breaking another election promise. He went on to say, just like our energy sector, it's obvious that Westminster simply sees our industries as a cash cow to bleed every penny out of. We should be backing Scottish businesses to thrive because that's how to deliver growth and support jobs. So basically, just as you said, Richard, tariffs on Scotch whisky would be harmful. I'm simply going to ask you, as you were an SNP MP in Westminster for a number of years, in your experience, what do you think the Scottish Labour MPs are going to be thinking and maybe probably going to do in relation to this vote?
What they're told, bluntly.
Okay.
Look, I mean, whisky is, it's 25% of total UK food and drink exports. It's massive, even on a UK level, never mind in terms of the massive contribution it makes to Scotland. There was already a 10.1% duty increase last year under the Tories. So it doesn't matter whether it's Labour or whether it's the Tories that are in power at Westminster, they talk a good game when it comes to the importance of whisky to the economy. And then when it comes to the budget, they see it as a cash cow. And Labour, by cutting some other alcoholic duties, have further increased the differential between the duty that's levied on whisky and other products such as beer and wine, which is daft. It sends a completely the wrong signal to the rest of the world in terms of how much it should be charging in domestic markets. And at a time when we're trying to break down tariffs, the barriers to entry for whisky to try and make it a more accessible drink for so many people around the world, and particularly in the growth markets in Southeast Asia, we're just sending completely the wrong message in terms of our own duty. I mean, some people, go, aha, but what about minimum unit pricing in Scotland? Well, the fact is minimum unit pricing applies to all drinks equally, whereas the UK government is actively discriminating against its biggest single food and drink export. So, that's the politics of it. They talk it up, they talk about how important it is, then that all goes out the window when the budget is actually delivered. And Labour MPs, just like Tory MPs, will do exactly what they're told, and will in government will vote with their government and will make a big song and dance about it in opposition. But the fact is, it's not just Murray and Strathspey and Islay and Argyll and the Highlands, where whisky is a big thing. There's so much of the supply chain in terms of bottling, in terms of bonded warehouses, in terms of all the other jobs that are associated with that industry. There's barely a constituency in Scotland that doesn't have jobs that are associated in some way with the spirits industry. And given, as I say, the massive contribution it makes to not just the Scottish economy, but also the UK economy, you would think that any chancellor with a care would be taking more care to nurture that industry rather than sending all the wrong messages out to the rest of the world and implementing tax changes domestically that have cost the industry hundreds of millions of pounds in sales, as we've seen evidenced at the cash registers.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, everybody goes straight to whisky when they're talking about trade and tariffs and the like. I don't think people realise how much gin Scotland produces. I think we're a major producer of gin as well. Maybe not as much as whisky, but it's certainly a major export. But time's against us still, so we better crack on. The SNP has called on the UK government to rethink its budget blow to Scottish farmers. Westminster's budget resolution votes are happening this evening as we came on air, and if passed would see the introduction of Labour's plan to force family farms to pay inheritance taxes in order to pass down land use for farming. Agricultural property relief also allowed farm buildings and cottages to be retained in the family, supporting small and medium-sized farms across the country. Rachel Reeves has faced fierce backlash from farmers, with the NFU president, Tom Bradshaw, saying her budget threatens family farms. Mr. Bradshaw went on to say, when you look farmers in the eye and make them a promise, keep it. The shameless breaking of those promises on agricultural property relief will snatch away much of the next generation's ability to carry on producing British food, plan for the future, and shepherd the environment. It comes after then Shadow DEFRA Secretary Steve Reid said in December that the Labour Party has no plans to change APR if it won the next election. Prior to the budget, the SNP's DEFRA spokesperson, Seamus Logan MP, had written to the Chancellor calling for APR to be protected. Now Mr Logan has written to the Chancellor again, demanding a rethink on the policy. Commenting, the Aberdeenshire North and East Moray MP said, in one fell swoop, the Chancellor has scythed away support for Scottish farms. This is a body blow to family farms, with the consequences being realised in the destruction of the farming tradition and in higher food prices. He went on to say farmers are rightly outraged that the Labour Party told them a barefaced lie when they promised they wouldn't change APR. That will live long in the memory of rural Scotland, and it's vital the Chancellor changes course. I've written to the Chancellor demanding this policy is reversed to protect farms across Scotland. SNP MPs will always put Scotland's interests first, and that includes our farmers. It's high time Scottish Labour MPs stood up and did the same. Richard, a similar mentions there of Scottish Labour MPs, and a call for them to stand up and do the same. It's not just the potential loss of the farm inheritance tax, though, is it, Richard? I mean, that's bad enough on its own. Many farmers are employers, which means they're also going to be liable for the increased national insurance contribution that employers are now going to have to pay, aren't they? So it's a double whammy. And then just with the cost of living crisis in general, that means higher costs for things like fertilisers and animal feed. Do you think there's going to be demonstrations, the kind that we often see from French farmers, happening either in Scotland, in Holyrood, or at Westminster?
I really don't know, but I do know that the NFU in Scotland are led very, very well, very, very effectively with their president, Martin Kennedy. They've got a great political team at the back there, which makes it sure that no elected politician is ever unaware of the issues as they're affecting farmers. And I was always hugely impressed with them in my time as both locally and nationally, in my time as first of all a councillor and then a member of Parliament at Westminster, in terms of how they made sure that I was kept informed of the issues that the local farmers I represented were facing. It's the cost of inputs has been a feature for a long, long time in farming, with the spike in gas prices that led to a spike in fertiliser prices. And of course, if you could just bump the price of your produce up, that might not be such an issue. But of course, many farmers have to be price takers in terms of what they're selling to the supermarket buyers. And there's an awful lot of supermarkets are not necessarily the best people to deal with when it comes to making sure that farmers are getting a fair deal, not just in that moment, but also in a way which allows them to operate sustainably and to meet the environmental objectives that we would, and quality objectives that we would all want to do. And then it's further undermined when the UK governments go and sign up to things like the Australian and New Zealand free trade deals, which the George Eustace, who was the trade minister who was involved in it, negotiating it at the time, the Tory MP from Devon, who said that the best clause in that trade deal was the one that allowed the UK to walk away from it with 6 months' notice. So, our farmers have not had their troubles to seek recently. You're absolutely right. Those who are employers will have an additional pressure on their wage bill in terms of national insurance. There's been an issue in terms of the inability to get seasonal labour, because there's not enough visas being issued for foreign labour to come in and do the jobs that our people here don't want to do, aren't skilled enough to do. Whatever, there's a labour shortage there that is undeniable, and the means that there was in the past of filling that is now no longer there, thanks to Brexit. And then, of course, you've now got the the issue of inheritance tax. Now, there's all sorts of issues around that, far too technical to go into here. But I would like to think that what the Labour government was trying to stop was the amount of chancers who are buying farmland without actually being farmers in any serious sense, or the sense that you or I might understand the word, and using that as a way of mitigating against an eventual inheritance tax bill for for those that they're leaving an inheritance to. You might say James Dyson and that. He's the one that's been the gobbiest about this over the last 72 hours, and lo and behold, it turns out that vacuum cleaner manufacturer extraordinaire who's so patriotic that he sticks and up to, with his headquarters to Singapore, is actually one of the biggest owners of farmland in the UK. So, if I would like to think that the Labour government was trying to catch folk who were trying to minimise their inheritance tax potential liabilities on an industrial scale by buying farmland. But in the end, they are going to catch, I don't think there's any doubt about it, they're going to catch an awful lot of family farms at the higher end in this as well. And that can't have been the intention, and it could have some very, very bad consequences. And I think it must be possible to find a way to catch the folk who are using this as a means of minimising their inheritance tax potential liabilities for the future, and separating them out from the people who have been committed, the families who have been committed to running farms for generations and years past, and who want to continue doing that for generations in the years to come.
Thank you, Richard. At the risk of either running out of time or running over time, can I just ask you really quickly about that vote tonight? Do you think what are Scottish Labour MPs going to do? What do you think the result's going to be? Are they going to do what they're told, or?
I think they're going to do what they're told.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe you'll be able to find out if there's a result yet while I'm reading out the next item. So at least 89 people remain missing after deadly floods in eastern Spain. Regional judicial authorities in Valencia have confirmed, as the country's Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, said he was earmarking €10.6 billion to help victims. The number includes only those who have been reported missing by family members, who have also provided personal information and biological samples to allow for identification, the Superior Court of Justice of the Valencia region said in a statement on Tuesday. It added that there could be more cases of people who have disappeared whose details have not yet been registered. More than 200 people were confirmed to have died after heavy rains last week caused waterways to overflow, creating flash floods that surged through suburbs south of the city of Valencia, sweeping away cars and bridges and flooding properties and underground car parks. There are still missing persons to be located, homes and businesses destroyed, buried under the mud, and many people suffering severe shortages, Sanchez said in a press conference in Madrid earlier on Tuesday. We have to keep working. At least 217 people died in Valencia, Castilla-La Mancha and Andalusia, but only 133 have been identified so far. The court said coroners had performed 195 autopsies and that 62 bodies were still pending identification. Spain's National Guard on Tuesday asked relatives of people missing to provide DNA samples to identify bodies. A research vessel from the national scientific body, the Spanish National Research Council, or CSIC, will reach Valencia on the 9th of November to help in the search efforts, the Science Ministry said on Tuesday. That vessel has technology to obtain detailed images of the seafloor and explore hard-to-reach areas, it said. There have been suggestions that some of the missing people could have been swept downriver and out to sea. The aid will include €838 million in direct cash to small businesses and freelance workers affected by the disaster and €5 billion of state-guaranteed loans. The national government will finance 100% of the clean-up costs incurred by local governments and half of the repairs to infrastructure. More than 100,000 cars were damaged by the floods, while damages to businesses and towns hit by floods could rise to more than €10 billion. Richard, these figures are heartbreaking. Loss of humanity, I think, is unbelievable. And yet I can't help harking back to the severity of the situation and climate change, and yet Donald Trump says it is going to continue to produce more oil. But I don't know. What do you think about the situation in Spain?
Oh, I think it's absolutely appalling. Like my heart broke. I was driving up from London doing my final flit all the way up to Aberdeen, so I had a lot of time in the car the day before yesterday. And I was listening to the radio, and my heart broke when I heard the story about a father who'd gone to rescue his twin boys, and he had them in his arms. And then, there was a torrent of water, and he lost them. They were gone. There was just nothing he could do. And, there are so many stories that are equally heartrending about people who are dead, missing, unaccounted for. And inevitably, there'll be a focus on the clear up. There'll be questions about why. But yeah, fundamentally, we can't deny that incidents like this are being caused by climate and the inability of infrastructure to deal with it. And it's not something that when water falls in that magnitude, it's not something that you can engineer your way out of. The solution is one for nature and making sure that the climate is able to be in, once again, heading for an equilibrium that allows us to live our lives as peacefully as you ever can ranged against the immense forces of nature. But no, the scenes have been heartbreaking. Of course, a lot of these places, there's floods in Barcelona. There'll be a lot of places that have been affected that people will be familiar with from their own travels. But it's a very human story, not just in its cause, but in the very, very sad and tragic outcomes that we're seeing.
Thank you, Richard. I've failed to make up time. We've only got 4 minutes and there's two stories left. But with your permission, I'm going to try and make both of them. I think they're both quite interesting. The Scottish Government has joined the Disruptive and Emerging Technology Alliance, partnering with representatives from 17 nations to maximise the benefits of new technology, such as AI, cybersecurity and space, while protecting human rights and democracy. In Barcelona today, the Scottish Government Business Minister, Richard Lochhead, addressed the first ministerial summit of the Alliance and showcased Scotland's strengths in dynamic sectors such as space and renewable energy. He also participated in discussions about potentially joining the European Space Agency's Zero Debris Charter, which aims to protect essential satellites by eradicating harmful space debris. Mr Lochhead said, "I am proud that the Scottish Government has joined forces with representatives from 17 other nations to discuss deploying new technology to maximise growth and improve our public services. By coming together, we can harness the transformative potential of new technologies such as AI, while ensuring that threats are minimised and human rights protected." He went on to say Scotland is already a world leader in important new markets. We have ambitions to further expand the space sector, which already has more than 200 companies operating in Scotland, and our critical technologies supercluster currently has more than 140 companies, generating £3.6 billion for the Scottish economy. He continued, "I couldn't come to Barcelona without expressing my deep sadness at the tragic flooding Spain is experiencing. I extend my deepest sympathy to all those affected." Richard, this is quite a nice contrast to we've been talking about whisky and how much money that raises for the Scottish economy. Um, people don't tend to People tend to think of those kind of old-fashioned traditional industries, and when they think of Scotland, they don't tend to think of AI and space. So it's quite a good one to almost finish the show on. Do you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, these are areas of potential enormous growth. There's huge opportunities with artificial intelligence, also huge challenges in terms of how you need to make sure it's being used appropriately, that there's appropriate human input and checks and balances, that you're not embedding that people, that copyright is being respected, that intellectual property is being respected, that, existing inequalities in society aren't being embedded by the AI algorithms. So there's not just the technological aspect, but there's also the philosophical and governance aspect. And I think, Scots have got a pretty unique outlook on the world, and it's our duty to make sure that we're contributing to the best of our ability at the highest level that we can, and we're not shut out from these developments in a way that the previous UK government tried to do when it had its AI summit at Bletchley Park. Scotland has a burgeoning space industry sector, so our involvement with the ESA, I think, is important in terms of our, the manufacture that we're that we're doing here. But I think the thing I would take from this, I think it's great that Scottish ministers go there and fly the flag for Scotland and build these links. And whenever you get a unionist politician slagging off the pretendy embassies, as they call it, when, Scottish Development International opens an office, in another European capital, this is the sort of work it's helping to support. And it's entirely normal for places like Flanders or Northern Ireland or Wales even to have international offices. This is a normal part of economic development and sub-state diplomacy that nations and regions that are not independent countries in their own right, whatever their aspirations might be, they engage in this. So whenever you get some unionists, politicians complaining about, Scottish ministers going gallivanting around the world. This is the sort of stuff they're doing, and this is the reason that they're doing it, in order to actually create further economic opportunities, to give Scotland a leading place, and to make sure that we stay attractive for investment and that we are at the leading edge of these kinds of developments. It's money well spent, and hopefully we'll see the benefit, not just in terms of the jobs and the wealth that comes to Scotland, in terms of the growth it can provide, but also in terms of the thought leadership that we are able to go on and provide in the world. And that's something that we should all be looking forward to and getting behind, irrespective of what we think about the constitutional debate in Scotland.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, we are already over time, so I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask my colleagues in the control room as well. Are you willing and able to stay on for a minute to cover the last story?
Aye.
Yeah, and in the control room, is that a yes? Yeah, okay, we're going to continue. So, the National Library of Scotland, thank you all. The National Library of Scotland, in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh's Remediating Stevenson project, are presenting a new exhibition examining the later years of Robert Louis Stevenson's life and his Pacific legacy. This free exhibition, which will open ahead of Robert Louis Stevenson Day on the 13th of November, reconsiders a writer who arrived in the Pacific as a colonial figure, but became locally beloved as Tusitala, Teller of Tales. Opening on Friday the 8th of November, Tusitala, Pacific Perspectives on Robert Louis Stevenson's, reflects on Stevenson's Pacific legacy, considering the ways in which the Pacific and its peoples had a profound impact on Stevenson and his writing. Displaying original letters from the library's collections, alongside photographs taken at the time, the exhibition considers how Stevenson lived in and navigated Samoan culture as both welcomed guest and colonial presence. The display will also feature new creative works inspired by Stevenson and his Pacific stories, produced by Samoan, Hawaiian and British artists, poets and filmmakers on the Remediating Stevenson project. Dr. Colin McElroy, manuscripts curator, said, Robert Louis Stevenson spent the last 6 years of his life in the Pacific. This exhibition reflects on Stevenson's reputation among the people of Samoa, Hawaii and other Pacific islands, displaying original Stevenson letters and images alongside new works inspired by his life and writing. We hear the voices of the Pacific echoing through these new adaptations and tributes to one of Scotland's literary greats. The Remediating Stevenson project leader, Professor Michelle Keown from the University of Edinburgh, said, We are delighted that the National Library of Scotland is hosting this exhibition, which explores an underrepresented element of Robert Louis Stevenson's life and legacy. Robert Louis Stevenson was born in Edinburgh in 1850, is one of the most famous writers Scotland has ever produced, best known for literary classics such as Treasure Island of 1883, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1886, and Kidnapped, also 1886. He set sail from San Francisco in June 1888 and spent the next 2 years voyaging across the Pacific Ocean with his family, before eventually settling in Valima on the Samoan island of Upolu, where he lived until his death in 1894. The University of Edinburgh will host a symposium in celebration of Robert Louis Stevenson Day on the 13th of November, reflecting on Stevenson's Pacific writing, travels and cross-cultural friendships. Tusitala, Pacific Perspectives on Robert Louis Stevenson, opens on Friday the 8th of November at the National Library of Scotland on George Forth Bridge, Edinburgh. Entries free. Richard, I wonder if you, like me, think that Stevenson is underrated, even although I do rate him. I didn't know that he had a day dedicated to him, and I think he's got such an incredible life story that there should be a movie about, a biopic movie about him. Yeah, I don't know, what do you think?
I agree with you, Brian. I didn't know there was a day devoted to his memory either, but look, I think there's Scots, for good or for ill, have had an enormous impact on the the world and our role as our role as colonisers, as well as other more positive roles. And the footprints of Scots go everywhere. And I think that there's few stories that are more remarkable than that of Robert Louis Stevenson. And so to be able to tell not just his story, and to to and the impact that he had in the South Pacific, how he was seen, not just to be able to tell the story of Stevenson the man, but I think that's very, very, very important, particularly in the context of a lot of the debates that we're having around that we have at the moment around colonial figures. So I think that's a really important debate in subject in its own right. But I think not just telling his own story, but if it helps to bring the stories that he wrote and which have brought joy to millions over the decades, I think if it helps to bring them to a new audience and help us to see them in a new light and bring them to new generations of people so they can be beloved into the future, I think that's a very, very good thing. And next time my own feet are passing through Edinburgh, I think I will. I'll try and find the time to pop in and learn something new.
Thank you, Richard. I suppose my only concern is that the only people that will go and see the show are people that already rate him as a writer, but no, hopefully it will open some eyes. Richard, thank you. We're well over the hour. Thank you to my colleagues also in the control room. Really, really appreciate that. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular payment, we thank you very much. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but we only receive donations of around £2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We are at crisis point and really need to increase our donations to be able to pay our bills and survive. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please just donate whatever you can afford. But once again, my thanks go out to our guest, Richard Thomson. Thank you, Richard, and as I said, to my colleagues in the control room. So that's it for this evening, and thank you to you at home for watching. Goodbye.